Well, it's about time to begin class. We got about 2 minutes, but that way Alan can lead us in prayer, and I'll have my whole time, and I won't have to squeeze those in. But we are in the Book of Esther, chapter 2. If you don't have a lesson sheet, the whole set of sheets are back on the back table, so you can pick one of those up, and or just follow along if that's what you care to do. But that's where we will be tonight. So if you care to be turning to the Book of Esther, chapter 2. And Alan, if you would mind, please lead us in prayer.
Let's pray. Dear God, our Heavenly Father and Creator, we're thankful you made us in this wonderful world to live in. We're thankful you gave us revelation from your mind that we might know you and know your plan for us and know why you made us and know how you love us and how you saved us through your Son. We're thankful for your providence as shown in all these things, and especially as we look at the Book of Esther and see your hand in a book that doesn't reference you by name, but has you written all over it. Be with Bruce as he leads our study. We're thankful for all who are able to gather. We're thankful for those that have been sick that have been able to join us again. Pray for others who are sick and suffering at this time that they might recover and be back with us once again, and you'd watch over all those that can't get out on a regular basis, that they might be encouraged. And we're thankful that there are ways that they can join us through the phone and through the live stream and receive instruction and encouragement. Continue to watch over us as a church and bless our efforts so we might always continue to grow spiritually, and bless our efforts to get the word out, and pray for your providence for souls to be saved. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. When we began last week in verse 3 of chapter 1, it was said it was the third year of the reign of Ahasuerus, or Xerxes. Sometimes Ahasuerus is used as a designation like president or emperor or something along that line, and most historical accounts will describe this as Xerxes, and his son who will follow is Artaxerxes. But anyway, it's the third year of his reign. He has just come back from a conquest of Egypt, and chapter 1 deals with the issues that went on with that celebration. When we begin chapter 2, it's 3 years later, and we can tell that because in chapter 2 and verse 16, it said that Esther became queen in the 7th year of his reign, and there was 1 year of preparation. So you do your math and subtract, and so it's the 6th year of Xerxes' reign, and he has again come back from a military campaign. This one not successful. He's trying to expand the nation of Persia and going more westward, and has run up against the Greeks and is defeated there. Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great are ruling in that area, and as looking at Daniel's prophecies, they will soon come over and take over Persia, run the whole gamut of Persia's empire. Perhaps if Xerxes was more of a historian and looked at the writings of Daniel, he would have maybe chose better before he picked that battle. But anyway, he's come back. It's not near the banquet and things that are going on. You remember that banquet lasted for 6 months. It was quite a celebration. Well, that's not happened here. He's come back in defeat. Surely that has been a costly battle, and to come back in defeat is not going to be well accepted, I'm sure, not only by him, but by all those involved with that. And his attendants notice his mood, and we'll begin reading here in chapter 2. I'm going to read the first 4 verses. And it says, "After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. And the king's attendants who served him said, 'Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, into the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given to them. Then let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti. and the matter pleased the king, and he did so accordingly. Again, if you remember, 127 provinces, we're talking about an area almost as large as the continental United States. They're gathering up young women from all over to bring in there. I have no idea how many individuals that entailed, how long that period took, but they bring them together. And now in verse 5 through 7, we're going to be introduced to one of these women. It says, now there was at the citadel in Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives who had been exiled with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. And he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. And now the young lady was beautiful of form and face, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. I don't know if Mordecai's father was the oldest and Esther's father was the youngest, but Mordecai could have well been older or the same age as Esther's father, but they're cousins. And she's much younger. She's an orphan. Her parents have died, and Mordecai, being family, takes her in and raises her. We read of no other children in Mordecai's family, not a wife or anything. There's no other information. But he raises Esther as his own daughter. And as we see, especially through these first few chapters, how she respects and honors him as a father and cares for him. I want to pause here just for a moment to look at a few things here that we see about Esther. She would have never been chosen if she wasn't what? What two things were necessary for this? Okay, beautiful and a virgin, okay? She's a young virgin who's beautiful of form and face. So we're talking about, her physical appearance, her physical form, and her facial expression, everything. That's what they're looking for. That's the only requirements to begin with. When we finish with Esther and start in the study of the Song of Solomon, we're going to see that seemed to be the only thing that interested the king in his pursuit of the Shulamite. So it just men, we're kind of being picked out here. So, but she is a beautiful young lady, and sometimes we kind of maybe cast that person as kind of different and stuff. But God uses people whose physical appearance will make a difference, and He uses them in places. And we're going to see this as we continue on through the study here. Her name is Hadassah, but she's called by Esther. Esther is evidently her Persian name, and by going by Esther, she will not reveal her nationality. Remember, there are hundreds of nations, different groups of people that have either been brought there or have immigrated there. Think of the United States. We're a melting pot. People from all over the world want to come here. And people that have been born and raised here don't seem to like it. I don't know what they can move if they want, but there's a lot of other people want to be here. And so you have all these different nationalities, so they don't really notice anything different about Esther. And she was evidently, it was her great-great-grandfather who was brought into captivity, so she grew up there. She's lived there her whole life, and so she may have physical attributes of a Jew or whatever, but she's acclimated into the Persian Empire, and so you would not take her to be that. And so she keeps her Persian name when she goes into this situation as far as being chosen to see before the king. Think of other individuals in the Bible whose names have been changed. If I talk to you about Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, you'd probably think, I'm not sure who those guys are. Well, it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those were Hebrew names, but they were given Babylonian names. Belteshazzar was Daniel's Babylonian name. Zaphanath Paneah was an Egyptian name given to Joseph. I'm kind of glad that the Bible just recorded him as Joseph. That's just a lot easier. Peter was born Simon. Jesus calls him Peter, and the Greek version of that's Cephas. So you see different names used for people, and sometimes it's to give an identity of them, but it often denotes their nationality. Have you ever talked to a customer service representative on the phone, and they say, "Hello, my name is Bill," and you can tell by the accent they're not from America. They're from somewhere, but not here. And even names give away a nationality. Dimitri is probably going to be German or Polish. Just hearing a person's name gives you a bit of an identity of what their background was. They may have been born in this place, but their family name gives away there's something different here. So we are introduced to Esther as Hadassah, and we'll see how that, not revealing her nationality and her background, will benefit and be to her favor as she goes on. Okay, let's continue reading here, beginning in verse 8 down through verse 16. So it came about when the command and the decree of the king were heard, and many young ladies were gathered to the citadel of Susa in the custody of Haggai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace into custody of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. Now the young lady pleased him and found favor with him. So he quickly provided her with cosmetics and food, gave her 7 choice maids from the king's palace, and transferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make them known. And every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. Now when the turn of each young lady came to go into King Ahasuerus, after the end of her 12 months under the regulations for women, for the days of their beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women. The young lady would go into the king in this way. Anything that she desired was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem, to the custody of Shazgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go again into the king unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, came to go to the king, she did not request anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And so Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. It doesn't take long to see that it wasn't just Esther's face and form, her beauty, her outward appearance that got her approval. What stands out here with Esther? Evidently. I mean, it's not specifically said here, but what's going to stand out, Wayne?
Well, it seems that she was pretty humble.
Okay.
She just trappings with her. She just took the advice of somebody that would know.
Sure. When it was time to go into the king, she said, "You know the king. You tell me what would please the king, and that's what I'll do." Tanya?
I was going to say that she must have had a beautiful personality as well, because it seemed like she found favor with everybody, even other women in the harem.
Yeah, and you think of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, and when they were taken in and they were put in a position of training, how quickly they were accepted and given special privileges and these things. Joseph, when he finally has a meeting with the king and reveals his dream to him, you look at the complete turnabout. But even before that, in prison and in servitude, Joseph finds favor and is quickly taken in and earns the confidence of those around them. And Esther is one of those individuals. It's amazing to see. And they're doing a study in the young adult class downstairs on the 12 apostles. And one of the beginning thoughts about that is none of those 12 were anybody's. They were all, no one knew who they were. They didn't have a great education. They didn't come from royal families. They weren't anyone in particular. But God used them in a way that turned the world upside down. Well, Esther and Daniel and Joseph are the same. They were nobodies, really. I mean, captives, subjected, sold into slavery. They had no credentials at all, but they had a love for God and a commitment to Him and a manner about them that God says, I can use that person. And they turned the world upside down, their world. And I say that to mention that if God could use people like that then, and they didn't do anything miraculous. There's no miracles going on here other than Joseph being able to interpret the dream and Daniel being able to do that through God's providence. But the disciples didn't know miracles or anything to begin with. They were just who they were. If God could use those people then to make that kind of difference, is there any reason why He can't do that today? You know, is there anybody sitting in here today that couldn't make a difference? And shouldn't we have the same character as Esther? Whether it's in our workplace or at school or in our home or our community, we should model these individuals in what they're doing. What's some other similarities that you see or characteristics you see about Daniel and Joseph and Esther and different ones that are not foreign to us that we can use? Kenneth?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't want to take the king's food, and their master thought that, that if they didn't, why, then he'd lose his head to the king.
Sure.
They said, well, let us eat this
Sure.
for days, and then you judge.
Yeah, and that's, when you look at these individuals, they didn't fight and rebel against it. They offered a solution. Rather than complaining about a problem, offer a solution. I've used this before this example. I know of a young gal from years ago who was involved at school, and the uniforms they had she was not comfortable with. They were just not really very appropriate, and so she went to the person in charge of the uniforms and gave a suggestion for some other ones, and the other girls thought, this is a great idea. I like these a whole lot better. And so rather than just quitting or fighting about it or causing a big deal, they offered a suggestion, offered a solution about how to make this work so that I can live with this and it's not going to cause a big issue. Can we not do the same thing? There's certainly there's things at work and things we're involved with that we don't agree with, but how do we go about making those changes happen? And so we see here, and Esther even, well, what would best suit this situation, so you tell me, and then I will use that advice. And so we see how she uses that. And so they seek change not by rebellion, but by offering solutions. And they use that position. Daniel and Meshach and Shadrach and Abednego and Joseph and Esther never put themselves in that position and looked down upon anyone else. What were they doing? Especially Joseph, when his brothers say, his brother's afraid, he's going to kill them after their father's gone. What does Joseph say? When the brothers question, are afraid of his position.
God put me here.
Yeah, God put me here to save you, This isn't me. This is God working, And Daniel sees that, and Esther sees that. And so what position am I in, and how can I best serve God in this position? And so we see, I mean, when you read through this account of Esther, it's an amazing account to read and to see all the irony. But when you really look at it, and as Alan mentioned in his prayer, you know, God is not mentioned, but you can't help but see him in here. And these people are living for God. Picking up in verse 17, it said, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And then the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and his servants, and he also made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, and Esther had not yet made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done when under his care. I think this is another point about Esther. She understands authority. And she learned that with Mordecai. She did that with Haggai. She's going to do that with the king. That same characteristic is going to be there. And when we get into chapter 3 is going to be, we're going to be in the 12th year. So we're going to be 5 years down the road. She's spent 5 years now as queen. And when we see the things that will happen after that, there's no reason to be surprised when she goes before the king and he allows her and he lets her come in, even though it was, you know, he didn't ask for her, which was what normally the situation was. So she has evidently built this relationship, continue to build this relationship with the king, and see how much that's really going to make a difference as this goes along. I'm not sure what Mordecai's position is, but he's at the gate. The citadel is evidently a fortress, perhaps enclosing the king's palace. You don't get in to see the king without going through the gates and getting into this. This is a fortified area of the city that he's in, and Mordecai has a position that puts him at the gate. And he's a Jew, and they know he's a Jew. And the Jews are accepted. We're going to see later on as we get into this how much the people embraced the Jewish nation because of the type of people they were. And you remember we mentioned last week that Jeremiah told the people, he said, you're going to be in captivity, you're going to be here 70 years. You need to build homes, raise families, seek the welfare of the city that you're in. You work for that. I looked and I read through Daniel twice, and I read through Genesis a couple of times. And I'm sure that it said that one of those fellas, one of the individuals, served his people and the nation. Maybe it was in Mordecai. I should have looked at that a little bit further. But they didn't just serve God and the nation of Israel, but they served the nation they were living in. They were responsible people that helped the nation grow. Because if our nation is doing well, if our community is doing well, what's that going to say for us as Christians in the community? Going to be okay? You know, if things are in a turmoil, if things are crazy, it's going to be harder on the population, of which we're part of that. So he says, you try to help make that a good situation. You do what you can do to help with that. Let's finish these last 3 verses here. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's officials from those who guarded the door, became angry and sought to lay hands on the king. But the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when the plot was investigated and found to be so, they were both hanged on the gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. It's been another point for Esther, warning her husband that there's an assassination attempt against him. But she also didn't take credit for it. she tells him, this is who told me this. This is one of your servants, Mordecai. And so she doesn't reveal the relationship, but gives him that information. What does this chapter show us about Mordecai? Jack?
Well, one thing, it shows his great concern for Esther because he provided her instruction. He obviously observed and was there at the gate to ensure that things were going well. So there was a tremendous concern and loyalty on the part of Mordecai toward Esther and her well-being. But there was also a loyalty to the king because he, having heard that plot, made sure that that information was relayed. And so he was a good citizen in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point that we're going to see come up later, especially when you get to the end of the book. But he was for the welfare of the community. He was for the welfare of the king. Him and the king didn't share the same politics, but he understood authority, and he understood who was in charge. Next week, we're going to see where Mordecai refuses to obey a command. And just to give you a heads up, if you haven't read next week's questions yet, Matt, we're going to talk about how he could do that and how that would go against, I believe it's Romans 13 or Romans 16. It talks about being subjected to the government and what happens when someone defies the government. Whatever Mordecai's background is, he's earned this position. I mean, there's confidence in Mordecai because he's at the gate. I mean, he's perhaps not a gatekeeper. I don't know what his position is, but he's in a position of knowledge and of information and knowing what's going on. You're not just going to let anybody sit at the gate of the fortress and just allow that to continue and to have correspondence with those on the inside, yet he's able to do that. So that shows us there's a degree of confidence in the authorities in Mordecai to give him that position. And hopefully, again, we see that in our own lives. Do the people that we work for, the people that we work under, do they have the confidence in us to give us a position and say, okay, I trust you to take care of that, and leave you alone with it and just go. And they were able to do that with Mordecai. I mean, doesn't seem like anybody's checking on Mordecai day by day as he's checking on Esther. Any other thoughts about this relation with Mordecai and Esther or the others?
It doesn't look like Mordecai had any ulterior motives. He didn't, what's in it for me? He was concerned with Esther and how that was going to happen. And whatever happened to him, it didn't matter.
Right.
Well, I don't know if it didn't matter, but, it wasn't for him.
Right.
Everything he did wasn't for him, like a lot of people do. So.
Right. Alan?
I just think of just from the idea of really he adopted her and raised her, adopted this orphan, and it's known many times for women, single women, to do that, to take in a child, maybe they're not married, but for a man to do that is probably, even in our day would be unusual for a man to do that, which, like you said, no mention of a wife or anyone else in the picture.
Yeah. But it's nice to know that he recognizes his family responsibility. And in our world today, that doesn't sometimes mean very much. We've seen, parents just, abandon their children, or children abandon their parents, or whatever. But he understands that idea of caring for family, and not in a way that's harsh, because she loves him, evidently. I mean, she obeys him, and that's one of the things I want you to notice as we move through this study. I'll give you a little spoiler alert. She is always following Mordecai's lead. Mordecai says, do this, do this, do this. And it's for her own good, but she does those things. Well, when we get about halfway through this book, that's going to change. And Esther is going to be the one who's going to stand out and say, Mordecai, I need you to do this. Mordecai, I need you to do that. And he does. And so that respect for one another's authority is going to make a change here, because she's the queen. You know, she has that authority now. You know, he is under her command. But we're going to see that change come about very fluid and very respected, and it's not going to be something like Mordecai's like, well, who are you to tell me? You know, that relationship between these two, to me, is just really amazing to see how that happens. I mentioned to someone the other day, I think it was when the Jones family was all up here, and I was talking to some of their grandchildren's friends, and they would say, oh, you're Caleb's grandpa. Well, used to, someone would say, oh, you're Bruce and Kathy's grandson. You know, well, now I have no name, because I'm just someone's father, or I'm someone's grandfather. You know, that role has changed here, and it's not something that's not who I am. You know, I am me, and we're going to see that role here change. And seeing it early here in chapter 2, again, you see that relationship between these two and how they understand each other and what their roles are. And I think that's just a pretty amazing thing to see how that is. And she treats him as a parent. And in, you know, matters concerning her, she does that. You know, they're rounding up all these women to go in and perhaps replace the queen, and what they're going to have to go through to do this, and they don't fight it. You know, they understand this is what's going to happen, and we can fight it, and we're going to be in a lot of trouble here. But they go through with that, but he also keeps an eye on her, and we see how whatever God's providence, she is put at the forefront because of her attitude. And it's interesting, how long do they wait before they are taken in for training? How long is their training process? 1 year. Some historians have said that's probably to make sure that none of these young girls that came in are not virgins and are pregnant, and now will claim to have a child who's an heir of the king. And so, okay, we're going to spread this out over a year to make sure that, you know, they're in confinement for a year to make sure nothing happens. And also, you know, ladies, they're in a you know, a pretty nice day spa for a year. They're pampered and treated with everything, and I'm sure that it's not just what else can you imagine that would go on in that year besides just making sure they're beautiful? Phil?
Speculation, but I would think there might be a weeding out process too.
Sure.
You know, you get somebody that's just belligerent and, you know, wants to fight everything. And
Yeah.
Gets fights with the other virgins and all
Yeah.
that. They might be sent home.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Why are they even in this position? What happened to the other queen? You know, Carol?
Charm school.
Yeah. The other queen disobeyed. There's certainly going to be some teaching here on how to be a queen. You know, this isn't just something that, oh, they're going to take him from off the farm and say, well, now you're the queen. There's certainly going to be training to be in that position. As, you know, she's not in these days probably a head of state, but she's representing the kingdom. And how are you going to act in that position? You've probably, I don't know how many of you have been fortunate enough to see a Hallmark movie, and, you know, some young girl that falls in love with the prince that she thinks he's a waiter at a restaurant or something. But anyway, he's the king, and she's going to have to learn how to become, you know, royalty. You know, this not just like, okay, well, we're going to take you in here and do this. There's a process here, and so they're going through all of this training, and as Phil said, there's probably a serious weeding out of this process, and she's able to do that for a year and get through that. And we're going to see that as queen, she holds that position very well and fills that well. And we're going to see that the king has enough confidence in her to, listen to her questions and her concerns and things, and to take him in as a confidant and trust her in that. And so there's a process going along here that she works well within.
I was
Jill?
just thinking that, like, too, these are, a lot of these girls would be from farms or whatever. They wouldn't know which fork to use, so to speak.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So they would have to teach them all that kind of properly.
Yeah, they're going to have to learn all of that. And when Vashti was summoned to the king's banquet and didn't come, what was she doing at the time? Yeah, she's hosting her own banquet. You're going to have to learn how to handle those affairs. And so when they brush through this and say, well, there's 6 months of this and 6 months of this, there's a whole lot that just by looking at the position that's going to take place here. And then when it happens, I think it's interesting in verse 18 that the king gave a banquet and called it Esther's banquet, and invites everybody in. And this is a celebration. It's been a dark time for the kingdom, and so this is it's a royal wedding, and so there's a lot of things going on that are going to be profitable for the nation, for the citizens, and to welcome this new queen in and see how that goes. And hopefully all of Xerxes' princes and the people that are his kind of right arm there will not be walking on eggshells and thinking, oh, we got a new one here. Wonder how this is going to work out. But she seems to. We go through this whole account, and at the end of it, she's still very much in very high esteem and given a lot of authority from the king. And so that starts back here in verse 7, where it talks about Mordecai raising her and bringing her up and teaching her not only the ways of Persia, but the ways of God, and how you're supposed to act in this situation. And we see that come to fruition here. Next week, we will be introduced to the fourth main character of this account, and do some background study on Haman if you care to, but we'll be looking at his background and some of the issues going on here. But understand that within this nation, within Persia, you've got all of these nations that have been brought in. You've got the northern kingdom of Israel has been taken by the Assyrians, and now Babylon has absorbed them. He's got the Jews, he's got Egyptians, he's got people from all over. And there are probably, it'd be like, I don't know if you've been to a major U.S. city, you go to a Los Angeles or a Chicago or New York, and there's Little Italy, and there's Little China and Chinatown, and there's there's Little Cuba. There's all these ethnic groups throughout, and some of these perhaps at one time were enemies, and now they're all together. And there still can be within some individuals a hatred for a particular group. That's sad to say. There are children who grow up being taught to hate another group of people, and they don't even know why. And I'm not just saying in the United States, I'm saying the world over, that becomes a reality. And so there's no reason to think that, as well liked as the Jews were and as much as they were doing, they didn't have some enemies in there. You remember when Daniel is promoted, what happened to the people who were the native Chaldeans when Daniel's promoted? You remember what their attitude was towards him?
They hated him.
Yeah, they hated him. They tried to kill him. They wanted him put to death. They're trying to figure out ways to get rid of him. We're going to see that same thing happen here as people rise up in a position of authority. Mordecai has a position of authority. It's not a great position, but Haman's not appreciative of him. And so we're going to see that turn around. And so those dissimilarities within the kingdom are they're there, and we're going to see that rear up its head next week when we look at Haman. Alan?
You may have seen there was a man, a gas station owner, that reunited a mother and a child. It was a front page story. The man from India, and the woman said she didn't go there to get gas because the person from India. But the whole incident of him saving the girl that got lost, changed her perspective and got her away from that prejudice where she said that she wasn't going to have she wouldn't get gas anywhere else now except for at that station here in Marion. So just a recent example of how those kind of stereotypes, can exist and do exist.
Sure, and most of that's just due to ignorance. It's because we don't know, and some of those things. But that's not something new in our nation or anywhere. I mean, that's existed from time eternal, and we'll see that, especially next week, start to really escalate. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope you will be able to take something from this, and we'll look forward to chapter 3 next week.